Hello and welcome to Reiki Women Podcasts. And today I have with me the lovely Michaela and Michaela Daystar and the lovely Carrie Varela. Welcome, ladies, women. Yes, and we're going to talk to you or with you and with each other about the subject of the future. Now, we brought it up in the last podcast that we had, and the subject today we thought we could just sort of extend last week into this week and talk about future support. So what forms of support we imagine coming to us as we continue on our journeys. And it'd be great for you if you've got anything to say about that. You can write it at the bottom of the video, or you can contact us. Maybe you want to have a chat, and we could video that as well. So what forms of support you imagine coming to you as you continue your journey? And this is as a Reiki practitioner or teacher. And by practitioner, I don't mean necessarily a professional practitioner. I just mean someone who studied the system of Reiki, and also as a woman. Yes, most importantly for this podcast. So we're going to begin with Carrie. Carrie, I'd love to hear what your future holds for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting topic, and I'm really glad that we extended it out and can talk a little bit more about what our vision of what the future can look like, both for ourselves and for the system of Reiki. And I think it's just it's an interesting turning point to look at that. And something that really excites me is to be, part of the leadership of Reiki and shape the future of the practice so that I think it can be more equitable and more open to different types of people, and of course be more supportive for women. So when I think about the things that will be more supportive for me in my journey going forward, one of the things that really came to me this week, and it kind of tags onto what something Michaela was talking about, is she's talking about how she was really grappling with the question of her identity as a healer, and all of the skills that she's learned along her way, and that she had one client that mirrored back to her saying, we need you in all of these different realms, that we can't just kind of put walls up and divide our work as something only for healers or in the healing arts realm, but is expand our vision of what healing can look like and practicing Reiki can look like beyond just our field. And then that client, of course, supported her and became a client and supported her financially for like 6 months. I think you said something like that. So that's one of the things that I think I can really share to everyone, is that something that you can lean into. And even though it feels like a little bit intangible, is that I've seen Reiki support me in that kind of fashion time and time again. That when I really needed something, or, I was really struggling with a question inside of myself, and that like to do the work and to show up and to be present to those questions, that the answer reveals itself. And a lot of times within that answer is the support that I really need. And I don't know how many times on my journey with Reiki and as an entrepreneur and somebody who works for myself, I just found that, as long as I keep my head in the game and I'm doing my work, that the support I need shows up for me. So that's one thing I can envision as something we can lean into, so we have faith in and trust. But I think, of course, the future of Reiki is one where we create more systems to support ourselves and get more professional about what it is to be a Reiki practitioner, and also a little bit more sophisticated about what it is to practice Reiki, and just have it be a part of our life and not necessarily do it for others or for a career path. So those are kind of the things that ruminate inside of me, thinking about how we can create more support for each other, and maybe create more of a roadmap for success, as both a student of Reiki, as somebody who just enjoys Reiki, wants it in their daily life beyond, their study of Reiki, and then also more support for practitioners. And so that's the support for practitioners, I think, is ultimately the place where I look to for a lot, both for myself and for my peers and colleagues. But I think that we can do better to support each other. And some of it is to create more professionalism around what we do. And I think that will make inroads into society. And I think Reiki is already making those inroads, where it is becoming a little bit more socially normative to be a Reiki practitioner and to study Reiki and to receive Reiki as part of your healing process. I know 10 years ago, it wasn't as normative for me and my community. I'm sure for you too, Bronwen. I'm sure you've seen a lot in the last couple decades as a practitioner. But nevertheless, I still feel like it is a roadmap for success for somebody who's taken a Reiki training, done all of the trainings, really feels like becoming a Reiki practitioner is their calling, and that they can step into that and use the support of other practitioners who've done that work themselves, and that we can lift each other up to do this work and become more of a mainstream part of society, and having Reiki be more of a support for people, all different types of people.
Yeah, that's interesting, Carrie. What I have seen is people trying to regulate the system of Reiki to bring it into, what you were saying, like a socially normative concept. So something like we have, and I'm sure you guys have that, with massage, that you need to have specific training, you need to have certain qualifications, that sort of thing. Not that the system of Reiki is massage, but yeah. And I just wanted to ask you, how do you see, do you see regulation as a way forward, or what do you see?
I don't know. I really haven't. That's a good question. I really haven't investigated too much about regulation, but I'm actually very familiar with regulation from the perspective of yoga, and I think that there's some problems either way you look at it. I think unregulating Reiki is a challenge because there isn't that social normative, and that, like, maybe in places where Reiki could be licensed, you could bring Reiki into new areas or bring it into healthcare, and that might be some of the journey if we were to regulate Reiki. Those of us who, those who would feel compelled to be part of that could maybe make some inroads into a more traditional forms of healing and making Reiki more accessible too, right? Because if Reiki was part of, being able, you could use insurance to receive Reiki, that would be, a huge form of creating legitimacy, not only for practitioners of Reiki, but also a means to get Reiki out to people who probably wouldn't otherwise have access to it.
Yeah.
So there's that. But I think there's also a lot to be said on the other side of the coin is, getting the government involved in and regulating what is ultimately a spiritual practice. And so there's a lot of problems there too. So
that's what I was just going to mention. See, I mentioned massage and you mentioned yoga. What about something like, if we take the meditative aspects of this, right? So we take the more spiritual aspects, which is what you just were mentioning, can you regulate those things? And how would you regulate those things? So, it is a really complex world. And I get the benefits of what you're saying and also the issues. And I know Michaela is desperate to say something.
I'm just chomping at the bit over here because I have so many thoughts about this topic. And this is not where I thought we were going to take it, but but when we're talking about forms of support, right, I think it's a really important conversation. So part of the perspective that I would bring to this question and what's been with me as this topic has kind of rolled out throughout our community. One comes from my background way back in the day as a tattoo artist. which I was a tattoo artist there for a while. That's one of my two truths and a lie topics when we're playing that game. But just from that perspective, that was an art form that was very much in the shadows and in the underbelly and viewed as something very countercultural and just overall negative, and was not seen as an art form, but as a form of rebellion. And as more artistic impulses, like people who really wanted to express their artistic talents through tattoo, really, brought the art form into a different place. There was this tension between the need to regulate it because of the medical aspects of it and the desire to keep it free and, not being interfered with by the government. And, ultimately regulation is what happened, and it transformed that industry into something that is really quite amazing and beautiful today. But there was a lot of tension inside the community around that, and a lot of people who never accepted that regulation was the key. And I actually know the person who spearheaded that regulation movement. And we've had some really interesting conversations. The other perspective as a Reiki artist is somebody who I've been denied opportunities to participate in certain things because there is not a certifying body that says, here's what it means to be a qualified Reiki practitioner. Here's what it means to practice Reiki. Here's how we can guarantee that certain precautions are being taken, that certain, health and safety and abuse avoidance tactics have been, accounted for and were part of your training and education. We just don't have anything like that. It's completely wide open what you teach as Reiki, right? You can spend 2 hours with a person or 10 minutes with a person who attunes you to Reiki, and then you can go off and be a Reiki practitioner, And so from those perspectives, I generally believe that our community would be benefited from some form of, collective decision of this is what it means to be in integrity and to be, qualified. I think the challenge is who decides what qualified means. Where are we looking in terms of the system, and how do we hold the spiritual aspects, as you just said? For me, like regulation, like to work well and to be a benefit to us would be narrow. It would be like, have you done some ethics training? Right? You're touching people in a private, vulnerable, setting, right? Have you done some ethics training? Have you done some trauma training? Have you, do you understand what it means to hold space for somebody who's, in a really difficult time? I think we're just at the beginning of that conversation, and a lot of the things that were proposed to be regulated were not things that are particularly useful across, a lot of different Reiki practices. And it really, the way that regulation was written demonstrated that it was written by people who don't really understand what Reiki is.
Yes.
And therefore did not really understand what specifically would be of value to regulate and what is irrelevant to regulate, right? And so that's where it would be, and probably will be, a long road of negotiation and fine tuning, and who gets to decide and define what this means. And right now, it's very chaotic in terms of who gets to decide. But in terms of support, right? What do we need to support us? If we just kind of look at it from that angle and don't look at the chaos and the mess and the disagreement around that, but just look from the kind of, meta view of what does it mean for us to have support? The legitimacy that some form of credentialing, right, would be a tremendous support, right, in getting opportunities to, being accepted as something that insurance covers, for example, as Carrie just said, and kind of, the widespread legitimacy. So I do see that as an important form of future support that is going to take a lot of effort and a lot of collaboration, and probably a lot of difficulty to get to something that really functions well. In that realm, because it's not as straightforward as something like massage. Now, I'm not a massage person, so I don't know the ins and outs of regulation around that, but it seems like it's a little bit more straightforward in something like that. So that's my response to that piece. I have other things on my mind around personal support, but I did want to just jump in on that topic because it's something I actually care a lot about.
Yeah, go for it.
What do you think, Bronwen, though?
Oh, well, I mean, like, I agree with all of you. I think it's just complex, messy. I was involved in Australia with the Australian Reiki Connection when one particular group, this is 15 years ago, one particular group in Australia wanted to regulate the system of Reiki through the governmental system, and but it was only for their system of Reiki. So if you wanted to actually be regulated as such as a practitioner, as a professional, you had to study their system of Reiki to be able to do it. And so, there was an enormous kerfuffle about that, of course, because it's not fair. So, we were trying to bring about commonalities between different systems of Reiki, and but there was a lot of pushback, and it all fell through in the end. There are different, I think it did get people thinking about it, which was a good thing, and it got people looking at what we do need, what would be, like, Michaela saying ethics, I always say basic counseling. I guess that's the same sort of thing, first aid, looking at these sorts of things. And so for example, the Australian Reiki Connection definitely set in place a lot of standards for their practitioners, and to help people move into that space as well. Not to say, well, you're not, like, you can't be a part of this because blah, more open and embracing of people, and finding those commonalities, which I think's definitely the way forward in any practice. And I do think that yes, there are benefits of some form of regulation, because there's always going to be shysters and whatever as well out there. So you want to be able to support people who come to the system of Reiki and go, I'd like to learn this. How do I learn this? What is this thing? And have something in place that's there that can give them some direction, and then they can choose what type, perhaps, if you like. I don't know how you want to call it, but I think there's definitely a way forward, but it, as you were saying before, it does require a lot of good communication skills, I think, and putting the ego aside.
And across all of those differences, right? As you said, and one of the things that you just brought up that I think is really important for us to keep in mind is that we don't necessarily have to be talking about governmental regulation, right? It can be self-regulation. Yeah. It can be, a group of Reiki practitioners coming together and saying, okay, yes, there's these different systems, but in the realm of humans doing intense, emotional, vulnerable work that involves touch and closeness and emotions on other people, what are the conditions that we feel, that, and looking to other fields that have already done this and do this well, right? That creates safety and trust and consent and care, and choice for everyone involved. And then how do we want to help people to get there? Not as a requirement, not as you can't be a Reiki practitioner if you don't do this necessarily, but where can we kind of set those standards out and then let people self-select? I think that's a really beautiful and useful way to approach it, because then you kind of experiment, right, in a way that's not constricted, but experiment in a way of like, what would it feel like if there was a group of practitioners who agreed to a set of principles and then took that education upon themselves, brought in experts from other fields that do it well, and do that. And that's actually part of the vision that I'm working on with Heartscape's Reiki Academy, which is what I've been kind of cooking for some time, and it will involve some of those pieces, some of those, like, the trauma-informed Reiki work, and things around ethics and integrity, and things around these issues that we're talking about. Yeah,
I mean, we've always put forward the idea of if you want to be a professional practitioner, there needs to be certain things in place. And also, 20 years ago, I put together those ideas that we have these 5 elements of the system of Reiki. And those 5 elements are not related to necessarily what I teach. Yes, they are. But what I'm saying is that the idea was it is a structure that was put in place. And that structure that was put in place, I think that structures had always been in place, but it hadn't been named. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we know that, the system of Reiki involves hands-on healing. We know that it involves Reiki. We know that it involves some form of meditative practice. We know that it involves symbols and mantras, so just that and the precepts. So, that we know that every Reiki class needs to address those aspects of the system of Reiki. And then, as you were saying, you have the extra stuff that is going to support you if you're going to be a professional practitioner, for example, or a professional teacher, for example. So, I think there's so much out there that we can draw on that can support us. And it would be great, yes, if there was some ways to support upcoming practitioners and teachers so that they feel that they have, I think, Carrie, you used the word roadmap, a roadmap that they can follow to become the best Reiki practitioner that they can be and the best teacher that they can be.
Yeah, I think I really resonate with everything that you guys are speaking to. And I think that there can be a really a beautiful way of self-regulation, and even, various lineages I know are trying to offer more support, and I think that should continue.
Yeah.
But for me, I think becoming a Reiki practitioner was kind of like just diving into the deep end and not really knowing how to swim. Yeah. And I still see that happening so much in the world of Reiki with other practitioners and people who just like, I feel called, so I'm quitting my day job and I'm jumping in. And
you need business skills. That's the other one.
Yeah, and it wasn't like that for me so much. So, but in some ways it was. But so I think what this conversation really is, stirring up in me is, and it's something that I've been really inspecting for a long time, is as how do we honor the lineage of Reiki, how it's been taught, but also rework some of the parameters, like Michaela and Bronwen are saying. Is like there's so much a wealth of best practices that exist, like in psychotherapy or talk therapy or psychology, on how to relate to other people and how to work with clients, and Reiki practitioners could really use some of that support. And likewise, actually, a lot of therapists really feel supported by the work of Reiki too. I don't know how many clients I've had over the years who have been therapists and just like, I need to kind of cleanse some of the energy that I experience when I work with others in this capacity. So I think there's a lot of synergy there. But if I look to, another modality that I know well is yoga. And, I wouldn't say it's the best, but at least the Yoga Alliance has a 200-hour yoga teacher training. And they regulate, a little bit about what goes into every training. So like Bronwen was saying, like we have to discuss hands-on healing, and we have to discuss the attunement process. And so in yoga, there's a designation number of hours you have to study anatomy, and you have to study yoga instruction and so forth. And so, I don't think it's the best system, because there's been a lot of issues with the Yoga Alliance over the years that I'm aware of. But it is, kind of cross-cultural, right? So that like there is like a standard.
Yeah.
That, I could lean into, I got my yoga teacher training, and I could know that, oh, like that yoga teacher training is certified, and, then then I can be a part of the certification process, and that would open doors to jobs. And if I didn't have that, credentialing, I wouldn't be able to get that job as a yoga teacher. So something like that, I think, would be incredibly useful.
That one of the aspects, Carrie, of what you were just saying then is something that we don't necessarily have in the system of Reiki. I think it's encouraged often, but the idea of a therapist has someone to check in with. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's part of being a therapist. We don't do that with the system of Reiki. And I think that, some people might, but you know what I'm saying? It's not it's not something that's accepted as one of the main elements of what we do, that we have to do that. And actually that checking in, and I think that would get rid of a lot of the issues that we are experiencing and have experienced in the system of Reiki, where teachers have gone a bit rogue and that they are doing things which have nothing to do with the system of Reiki anymore, but they're calling it the system of Reiki. So, being able to check in with someone, once every, I don't know how often therapists do that, possibly when they need it, but maybe when they first start, they do it more regularly. And being accountable then to someone, if you like, for what you're actually doing and how you're doing it, I think would be a really valuable professional tool within the system of Reiki.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've never heard that suggested as a thing that we should do one time. This is the first time. Yeah. And yes, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think we were touching on that a little bit last time around having somebody for like accountability and for like as a sounding board, and, reflecting back, decisions that we've made, and, that just kind of check and balance of having a co-teacher or having somebody else within your own practice, but perhaps even somebody like you're suggesting, even outside of your practice,
like a board or something that
like that holds that kind of space. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, we're working with something which is so ephemeral, something that it's hard to grasp often, and things can happen to us, things can happen to our clients. And who do you talk to about that? I mean, you're lucky if you've got, a teacher that you feel that you can, but a lot of people will. Now, this goes back to our very first conversation, I think, Michaela, where you were saying an experience happened to you, and you were like with a client, and you never spoke about it because, you felt whatever you felt. I can't speak for you, but that, sometimes we feel, shame, or we feel fear, or whatever it is. And how do we deal with these things? So, moving forward, that would be great if we could find some way of supporting people with that.
Absolutely.
It's just such an important topic, and I involved in a lot of different Reiki groups and discussion groups on social media and things like that. And one thing that just really feels like it goes along with the conversation we're having is I think somebody wrote about, I'm really interested in taking the leap to teach others Reiki. And I think that that's also a big leap on our journey as Reiki practitioners. There's not a lot of support around that. Like, how do you take the trainings to become a Reiki master, if you use that term, and then, go into that next expression. And if you feel really called to teach others Reiki. And well, I was just reading through all the comments. And one person who I think is, is a pretty established Reiki practitioner said, one of the things I tell my Reiki master students to do is after they've graduated, if they want to teach others Reiki, that they write their own manual for their students. And I'm just going to tell you, that's like a huge red flag for me, because I think that that's so wrong. I think that somebody who's just done a Reiki training, master level training, is not qualified to write a manual about Reiki. I think it's one of the ways that practice gets very diluted, and things that get added in that aren't necessarily factual or true. I don't think every Reiki manual needs to be peer reviewed, but it's just like there's so much freedom to share whatever it is that you want to share about Reiki there. And a lot of it is so intuitively guided, which is also very problematic.
Subjective.
And it can be very, very challenging. And, my first Reiki training, I still think I got a lot from it. I really respect my teacher, but it was all just her thoughts about energy. It really wasn't anything to do about Reiki.
No.
I don't think we even opened the manual that I had to, that was printed, that I just had that a little bit more legitimacy to it. So I think there's a lot of Reiki trainings out there like that. And
it's such an interesting one. And when I think about like the future of the type of support that, I would personally want, but also that I would personally want to provide or see provided to particularly incoming, in this case, teachers, clear structure around something like writing your own manual, right? Because your manual is your curriculum. It's guiding what is going to be taught, right? In theory, right? In theory, you're teaching from your manual, right? And, so when I designed my teacher training, there's a module in there on how to write a manual, right? If you're going to write your own manual, like, let's walk through it. And until then, working with me and, and being a teaching apprentice, like, means you get to use my manual that I've spent years developing, and so, like, how do we support each other in passing on information that feels solid? And again, kind of comes back to, well, what does solid mean, right? Like, I have a real clear understanding of what I would call solid Reiki education. It's going to be different for different people, right? And, there's so many different ways of approaching it, that how do we say what is a solid foundation? But I think, to your point, Carrie, at the very least, it means that, a 2-day class or even a much longer class, Reiki 3 class, doesn't necessarily set us up well to design a class, design curriculum, write a manual, and deliver that curriculum as a qualified teacher. Like, teaching is its own set of skills. It's its own skill set. It's its own, world, right? So how do we set people up to do that well? Not only the teaching aspect, right? The skills involved with communicating something that we know to other people, but the transmitting of the information in a way that has integrity and solidness to it, that allows space and flexibility for our own intuitive and, life experience to come in there. But again, back to your point, Bronwen, that, there's certain foundational things that have to be there in order for it to be the system of Reiki, right? Those 5 elements, which mean something specific inside of the context of Japan in the 1800s. Right? Like, those elements did not come from nowhere, and they certainly didn't come from the United States or Australia or anywhere else. They came from Japan in the 18 and 1900s, and much, much, much earlier, right? Way back in history. And so, what does it take to be qualified to transmit that information and to do it well, right? And what kind of support then do we need to put around that, that sacred pathway of the teacher? Right? I mean, a teacher, it's a sacred path, no matter what it is that you're teaching, is how I relate to it, right? Like, you're transmitting something of value to another person. And how is that done well? So yeah, I agree, Carrie, that I think I read the same conversation that you're referring to, that, like, to make a concrete statement, like, you can only be a teacher if you write your own manual. Has that person been prepared to do that? Right. Are they prepared to do it?
I'm sure Bronwen wants to say something, but I guess one of the things that might be a very wonderful way to prepare yourself to teach Reiki, but it has to come with a check and balances where you give that manual back to your teacher, and there's a inquiry around whether you've done it well, or I think that's some part of, like, the lineage we talk about. It might be a little bit linked with Orientalism and racism in the West, but, like, from the East, there's this idea you apprentice with somebody as a seasoned teacher, and you work with them for a period of time until you are given the reins to go out on your own. And that's certainly some of the language that we use in Reiki, but it's become so, I don't know, driven so much by, oh, just use your intuition and that's all you need, as if we don't need each other. And I think we need each other. We need each other so much. And if all we're doing is following our intuition, I think that is not a roadmap for success. I think that there's a lot more tools out there that can support us, including our intuition.
Look, I mean, I agree, but I guess what I would say is that I don't think you should be writing a manual unless, or is it the other way around? Unless you are, until you are someone who is working at a certain level. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So as you say, you can't just do like a couple of days course and then go, oh, I'm going to write a manual now. It doesn't work that way. And as all of us know, and probably a lot of the people watching, writing something, I found writing manuals the same as writing a book, which is, a lot of hard freaking work. And, you put many, many, many hours into that. When I first learned the system of Reiki, I was given a couple of photocopies and they were all different fonts and they'd obviously been taken from here, from there, from here. Someone didn't give a, what they were handing out. And I had no faith in that whatsoever, and it gave me a lot of questions. And it also made me question the teacher, so this, everything you're saying is right. It's if we talk about being professionals, then we need to also act professionally. Yeah. I think it's fine to write your own manuals, but you need to be really strong in your teaching skills and your knowledge and your wisdom to be able to move into that space.
Absolutely. That actually relates with one of the things that came up for me originally when I thought about support. We were preparing for our conversation today. And this is, in part totally reflective of my personal background and career journey, and just who I am as a person. But I think also relates to what we're discussing here, which is that I would love to see more support and more interconnection with universities and with research. There's, some research out there, and kind of from a collegiate perspective around the history of Reiki, around its Japanese origins, some around the science of it that's kind of, blended with kind of metaphysical scientific studies of the brain and of energy work in general. But I'm thinking more like culturally, sociologically, right? Like more of the kinds of questions that we're talking about here. What does it take to teach well? What does it take to work with people around this particular modality well? Case studies on where that works well, where it doesn't. What are the pitfalls that people fall into? What is the impact of having a bazillion different, forms of Reiki that get developed, sometimes very thoroughly with a lot of intention and research and development, and sometimes quite spontaneously and intuitively, that then become a new lineage, So, from my background as a higher ed wonk for my whole life, coming from a family of university professors, like I would love to collaborate with some grad students on this kind of project, right? To give us some data, to give us some, just another lens to think about how we are proceeding, and to do that work with people who are supportive of the system, right? Like not from the perspective of like, as an academic, I'm going to tear this up and I'm going to, say all the reasons why this is nonsense, and, not that perspective. Although of course you open it up, you're going to get all kinds of perspectives. But I mean, folks, who have a personal understanding and a personal valuing of the system, who want to help further the system and help further the legitimacy of the system, back to our original topic, in ways that are supported through academic research. So that's a form of support that came up for me as something that could be really valuable. And I think that something like that could lead to what I was talking about last time, which is greater collaboration across industry and across different types of regions and different types of work, right? And so, I talked about connecting with social justice organizations and nonprofits and kind of bringing Reiki into those spaces and talking about the value of having a practice like this. And, I think that sort of research would help make those connections more strong.
Being less isolated.
Exactly.
I think in the Reiki world, we see ourselves as other than, separate, isolated. We don't actually see ourselves as connected, which is very interesting, right? Because if you think about the practice, so we're not seeing ourselves as being a fluid part of this wonderful world and blending with all these, everything that we do, and whether it be work or play or whatever. We say personally we do, but if you look at the world in the greater picture, it's not happening. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. One of my very favorite things I ever have done, well, recently anyway, as a Reiki practitioner, was a spontaneous request from a woman who runs a farming education program at a local nonprofit in my area, who they were starting a really important community-based food hub project, and they wanted a blessing for this. They wanted to come together as a community of people who had worked on this project and engage in some sort of meaningful, she didn't use the word spiritual, but that's what she meant, spiritual engagement with the feeling of this project, right? To connect with the spirit of this project and the people that they were there to support, and to have some kind of experience as a team that went beyond all of the thinking and doing that they had been up to. And, just through my connections, someone suggested that I be a person to do that. And so I got to, lead this group of farmers through Joshin Kokyoho and through, expanding their hara out to connect with all of the people that they were going to help to connect with organic food, over the next few years through this project. And it was like, that's what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. If a group of farmers can be like, yeah, we can do some meditating together, right? We can look at our hara, whatever the heck that is, then, we really can have the kind of interconnected community that doesn't have us looking at ourselves as, othering ourselves, right? As being so different from the rest of society that there isn't a place for us.
Yeah, I really resonate with that conversation, because I think for a lot of years I felt that way, and I still struggle with that feeling sometimes. And, if I look to a future Reiki woman who wants to be on this path, I would want her to feel more supported than I was. I think we can do that. And as we do that, we support ourselves as well, right? And so I think, to me, one of the things that it really comes back to is for other Reiki women practitioners is always being mindful of what your scope of practice is, and what a Reiki level 1 training, like what kind of scope of practice does it give you? Like how can you apply Reiki, both personally and with others, and then feeling that expansion with Reiki 2 and with Reiki 3. And then beyond that, as you become a Reiki practitioner or a Reiki teacher, but always being clear, like, because I feel like, I think what is true is, like, let's say you have a background in therapy, is that your scope of practice might be a lot bigger with Reiki, like very, like right from the start, because you have like this expanded education that you can lean back into. And similarly, when I blend Reiki and yoga, there's like this expanded like scope of my practice. So always just being mindful and really like playing within that scope and building more within that scope, rather than, I think a lot of times in my journey is always feeling like I need to expand my scope of practice, like, oh, do this outside of my scope and then I can widen it. But really actually building within that scope of practice, I think, is very useful.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you were saying, Michaela, too. I mean, there's just so much out there, and Bronwen too. There's so much out there from other modalities that we could lean into. And those who, work in therapy and love Reiki, they can help us create, a little bit more. But one of the things that I've been really mindful of is that I don't think a Reiki 3 training gives one the ability to offer spiritual guidance to somebody else.
Yeah.
I feel like very strongly that that's another training. That's another topic. That's another thing that you develop over time. And that's problematic. I know that's a new topic to our discussion.
I think that's a really interesting one, actually, especially in line with what we were just talking about earlier on, and this idea of having a mentor, or whatever you wish to call it. It doesn't have to be a teacher, but to be a mentor. I mean, there are certain skills that you need to have to be able to do that well, and to support someone else. I mean, teaching the system of Reiki, I always say to people, remember, you're not a therapist. You can't guide people in any sense, because these are not the skills that you are learning when you are studying system of Reiki, unless they're the skills that you've gone and learned elsewhere.
Right. Totally agree.
Mm.
Yeah. So rich. I love that we've stepped into some of the messier conversations and some of the discussions that are so important to have, and to open up different perspectives on, and really with the intention of building a stronger, more integrous community.
Yeah. Look, we're going to finish up soon, but before we go, I just thought it would be lovely if we would say something about, on a personal level. I know we've thought about that. Where do you see your future in the system of Reiki as a woman? Carrie, go for it.
Oh, goodness. Well, I love that question, because what I would love to see is just more of an establishment of women at the center, women at the top, women informing the decisions around Reiki. Because I think if we talk about like the topics we talked about, like regulating Reiki or creating a self-regulation, I can see that men, or we might more easily step men into that role of leadership. But I really would encourage women to do that and step into that role, because it might likely would look different and feel different. But as a woman, well, I'd love to see more Reiki come like it's from within and out to the world, rather than from top down. And that's something that really, to me, is very important. And I think when we can get into these messier topics and we can unwork them, or really touch into the core of the issue, and then from there expand outwards and create a better pathway for others, that's something that I'm all about. So for me and my career, what I need support with, I think, is just the support to share my point of view and perspective, and respect for myself and from others for what I've been through inside of my journey with Reiki, and that people could listen into that experience as something that also informs how they choose to show up.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I think I'll use the opportunity of your question to name 2 very specific things that I'm working on manifesting, and just invite you all to hold it with me. Firstly, I envision in my future being a space more and more and more that provides a comprehensive Reiki education in the realms that we've been discussing. And so specifically the Heartscapes Reiki Academy that I'm working on will be a space that provides comprehensive Reiki education that's trauma informed, that's culturally humble, and that's rooted in the origins of Reiki. And that, provides a container to help people build the kind of rigid, that is not the word, rigorous firm, rigorous, but also flexible ways of conducting their practice with integrity. And also very specifically, I think I have a book inside that's wanting to come out, specifically the trauma-informed Reiki piece. You know, I wrote a 77-page manual for that class, and I'm going to call that the first draft of the book.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. I'm always thinking there's a book inside somewhere. I've been working on an animal one for a while, but you know, I just keep working on things. I don't know. I'm not very good at finishing things sometimes.
You and me both. That's why I'm being concrete. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to finish them.
I need someone to say, well, it has to be finished by such and such a date. And then I'm like, and then I'll do it.
That's regulation, right?
Self-regulation. Yeah. That's beautiful. Thanks, Michaela. Sounds like a very busy future for you, for sure, right?
So.
For myself, I'm unsure, to be honest. I don't really have an answer to that. I think I'm still finding my way, and you know, I'm loving doing treatments and, you know, teaching here and there. The support that I would need for myself, I don't know, you know, I think something that I've found of incredible value in our discussions is this is something that I really enjoy doing, and it's fun and it's thoughtful, and it draws on everybody's experiences. I find that really interesting, and I love that it is a group of women talking together rather than one person, you know, just espousing their views. And so I would like to see this idea continue to grow for me. It's something that I feel quite connected to, and I feel that we, in this type of conversation, create a safe space for us to be able to speak. And that's why it's about, you know, the voice of women in the system of Reiki, and hopefully that it is a safe space for other women to speak as well. And so for me, I'm enjoying this project enormously, and I would like to see it continue to grow, and to hope that other women feel the benefit of that experience, and that it supports them in whatever it is that they're doing. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, it's the end of our chat today. I loved it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, hope it's supportive for more Reiki women out there.
Me too, 100%. You know, yeah.
So friends, let us know in comments or reaching out, what sort of support do you find important, and what do you envision for your own future in your journey as a Reiki practitioner? Let us know, and we will see you next time.
Thank you. Bye. Mwah.